Welcome to the podcast. Eric is the autobiography of my grandfather, Eric Langridge. His story opens up in central London in 1925. In our last episode, Eric shared with us the humiliating punishments that he and others endured, some of the daily and annual events, the mixed experience of going to the local church, and some of the foods that he would routinely have to eat. In this episode, he shares more about the punishments that were inflicted upon him, medicine times, and we see him making another change in his early life. Medicine times. Every Saturday morning, we had to line up before breakfast with our mugs. As we passed the master, he would pour in Epsom salts, Cenopods, or other laxatives. Apart from having a nasty taste, it had its dreadful effect. Either it worked immediately or sometime later in the day. However, after the allotted time, we were not allowed to use the toilets, often with disastrous results, especially in the younger boys. Not only did they suffer the indignity of making a mess, but they were also punished. We also had to take brimstone and treacle. This was administered on a spoon. It was quite pleasant to take, but had equal results. It was almost a torture. One day in the course of our school year, there was an outbreak of head lice in our school. We St. Luke boys got the blame, and although we had very short haircuts and the master didn't believe it, to satisfy the school governors, we had to have the treatment. Once again, a large quantity of boiled soap was made with strong disinfectant. We had to scrub our heads every day, and this stuff stung very badly. Our heads were almost raw. A number of us boys, including myself, also suffered a spate of boils on the neck or elsewhere, and this was the set-in for another torturous course of treatment. Apart from cleaning the area with TCP, which stung, the master would make a sliver of wood and shape it to a point. He would then wrap cotton wool on the end and dip it in iodine and scrub the boil. It was very painful and would continue until the boil broke and eventually healed up. He seemed to enjoy being rough, and he blamed us for catching boils by not washing properly. And then there was the most shameful disease of all, ringworm. It was brought in by a new boy from Belgium, and about a dozen of us caught it on our heads. This meant we had to suffer the loss of our remaining hair until we were bald, so obvious to all of our school friends. But the treatment was worse. He tried everything. Neat disinfectant, neat iodine, and the dreaded pointed stick. It was a long-lasting illness and even took us into the summer holidays. Matron had the idea that what we needed was plenty of fresh air, so we had outdoor duties. The sun and flies caused irritation and we were not allowed to scratch. She then came up with the great idea that Miss Polly should make us all wear cotton berets, much like ladies' bathing hats. Naturally, we looked like a bunch of sissies and were teased cruelly by our fellow inmates. It was a dreadful time, and we were all made to feel ashamed of ourselves. One of our sunshine jobs was to go out into the lawn and do weeding. We had to kneel down in a line and pluck the bank grass short and remove weeds. It all had to be thorough, and it was trouble for anyone who pulled out tufts of grass, leaving holes. We knew we were being watched and dared not ease up. We also endured the coughs and colds which were dealt with equal amounts of unsympathetic treatment. We were told all illnesses were due to our own neglect. And the amazing part about it all is that we never ever saw a doctor. Poor old Miss Polly had the unenviable task of being responsible for our care. More punishments. Now that the hairbrush was the form of caning, because it was less likely to show wounds, it was used more frequently and more often in unusual places. He would strut about with it, slapping his thigh, and would often give us a crafty whack as he went by. One of the more painful sights was on the elbow. Eventually someone, somewhere, came to the rescue once again, and the hairbrush torture was dropped, so he had to resort to other measures. All the landings and staircases were highly polished wood, and it was a part of our duties to keep them polished, but now, instead of being a duty, it was used as a method of punishment to be carried out evenings after school. We had to stay at it until bedtime. Another duty we had was to be responsible for the cleanliness of our own shoes and boots. They were kept in small pigeonhole boxes in the back corridor where it was quite cold. He now had the bright idea that a number of boys on punishment would share the number of shoes and boots between them and clean the whole lot. Also, again after school or during holidays. I often was given this form of punishment and found it a very hard task. To do this cleaning, we were all issued with a pair of shoe brushes and a tin of Day and Martin polish, which was very hard, like a brick. We would spit on this polish and then put it onto the shoes, and then we would use the softer brush to polish them up into a perfect shine. When they were all finished, we then had to wait for his inspection. We would pick up our shoes, place our hand inside, palm side down, and hold them up. First we showed him the toe caps and lace-ups. Then we turned them in so he could see the outside, turn them again and show him the inside, and finally show the heel and instep underneath. All this would be done automatically with us looking straight ahead. Now obviously we were nervous and would be tempted to glass down, and that's when we would get a whack on the back of the head. On one occasion, when we had virtually finished our task, Matron appeared and said, "That's enough, boys. Put your stuff away and go sit in the classroom." Naturally, we were quite relieved and did so gladly. However, later on, he came into the room, and when he saw us sitting there, he went mad. He gave us a rap with his knuckles and added another week onto our punishment. So the next time Matron tried this, we ignored her and carried on polishing. Now she went mad, ranting and calling, Tom, these boys are ignoring me. They're being disobedient." And so we would be in trouble yet again. The younger boys in the back bedroom suffered dreadful punishments all of their own. Bedwetting was treated as a crime, rather than, as it is today, an illness. We all wore nightshirts, but the small boys had the front tail cut off so it wouldn't get wet. What was worse, they were made to stand out on the landings with their hands above their heads until master's bedtime. In the meantime, some of the little ones would lower their arms or even nod off, and he would tiptoe upstairs to catch them. Then they would get a boxing around the ears. If they persisted in bedwetting, they would sometimes lose their mattresses and be made to sleep on boards. Their treatment was merciless. I know for a fact that this happened because my little brother, Lionel, was one of the victims. Another habit the master had was to grab us by the earlobe and give it a twist, and then drag us along in the schoolroom or along the corridor. At a later date, this was shown to be the cause of my brother's deafness. And then, of course, there were the continual punishments of haircutting knocks, Miss Polly's knuckle pie, loss of playtime, and loss of meals. It never ceased. We also suffered insults and degradation in front of all the other boys, and there was no one that we could turn to. We did have nice times throughout the years, and they were always looked forward to with great excitement. They were usually kept as a surprise and an instrument to make us behave ourselves. Misbehavior would mean we couldn't go. We had outings to the seaside, usually financed by the friends of the home or a loaded benefactor. Brighton, Hastings, or Eastbourne were our favourite places to visit, although Hastings was used as a learning program all about the Battle of Hastings. It was a school exercise, and we did essays about it afterwards. Brighton was a very happy day out, and we used to have quite a long day there. We were allowed to visit the pier and watch people enjoying themselves on the penny slot machines. We were not allowed to touch them. The head boys would see that we didn't. And then it would be back to the beach for swimming or for the little ones paddling. On one occasion, our treat included a dinner at a posh restaurant. We sat at individual tables and were waited on by waiters and waitresses. We were thoroughly spoiled and ate lots and lots of food. There were no restrictions. Even the master and matron were human. At other times, when we were at the seaside, our dinners were provided by a local bakery. There were steak pies, one each, sandwiches and cake. It was wonderful. The only thing that spoiled our day out was when we sat on the beach. The sun would be beating down and we were sweating. The grey shirts made with horsehair were very uncomfortable and itched dreadfully. We used to try and sit with our backs and necks away from the material. It ruined our day, and we were glad when we moved and got back into the shade. One day we were told that we were going to have a day out on the South Downs, a range of hills that ran along the coast of Sussex. I don't know what we all imagined, but I remember that days before the expedition we were all trying to collect and save pieces of string. We would get string from parcels or ask the boys at school for some. We imagined we were going climbing and would need ropes for hauling each other up, much like Everest, we thought. Of course, when we arrived, there were just green hills, and there was no need for the string. Nevertheless, we had a wonderful day walking the paths, and eventually we came across two huge windmills, Jack and Jill. They were used for pumping water from underground springs. At the end of the day, we had marched back down the hill to the pumping station, where we were all given a glass of pure, cold spring water. It was wonderful. Another special day out was when a local farmer invited us all to his farm. We were allowed to wander about quite freely, visiting sheds, stables, and barns. Some animals had been kept in the yard so that we could experience close encounters with creatures most of us had never seen before. We were treated to a meal of farm pie, cheese, and lemonade. The farmer and his workers and a visiting farmer took groups of boys around and showed them machinery, explaining how it all worked. We also saw huge horses and all their harnesses. We thoroughly enjoyed it and were able to write good essays about it. There were many sports days we enjoyed, and we were invited to play against other schools. Cricket was a favourite game that we were able to play in the home playground, but we were not allowed proper balls to play with because of all the windows and the glass houses in the vicinity, and so we resorted to make our own. First, we would obtain pieces of rag polishers that were no longer needed. These had to be soaked in beeswax polish and were able to be rolled tightly. We would then roll several layers of paper around them, each layer wrapped with string. And when we thought they were the right size, a final piece of rag was wrapped and tied on very, very tightly. The result was a very useful cricket ball that would last for several games. The cricket stumps were drawn on the walk with chalk, and we were all set to play, and we all became quite proficient at it. During winter months, we were allowed to play table tennis in the classroom. We were also allowed to listen to the radio to Wimbledon tennis and also to the big boxing matches. Sometimes on Sunday evening, we had a hymn singing with lantern slides. My favorite hymn and picture was Eternal Father, Strong to Save. 1 week every year during the summer holiday would be another treat we enjoyed. Although it lasted a week, it was called Pound Day. Friends of the home, village people and parents would arrive bringing pound gifts, pounds of anything, sugar, fruit, flour, jams, vegetables, or money. Trestle tables were laid out in the corridor, and we boys would stand behind them to receive. Perishable items would be taken away to Miss Polly's pantry. It was amazing what she had stacked up in there. The treat of this week was that the perishable fruit had to be eaten by us all. Vegetables improved our dinners and cakes, etc., and they were shared out quite infrequently. There were also large cans of golden syrup given to us, so we would have it on our bread and butter or treacle puddings. But the best of all, the master would make toffee, which he would break up into lumps and hand out to us from a biscuit tin when we were good boys. Every December, after all the carol singing and services, we were all treated to a visit to Brighton Pantomime on the pier. It was a wonderful show, at the end of which there would be a competition where we would describe what we had seen. One year I had the good fortune to win this, and my prize was a day in Brighton accompanied by the local press. Then in the matinee program I was called up on the stage by the manager to receive a gift. It was a book token, and as I received it, photos were taken. On the way home the master stopped at a bookshop, and I was able to choose a book. I chose a book about the First World War air aces. I was very proud of it, as I had won it. However, after I had been allowed to read it, I had to hand it over to the school library, which was a great disappointment. Life went on as usual, some days good, but more often than not bad. On 1 or 2 occasions we had the opportunity to meet boys who had been sent back to the home for re-employing. They had either run away from the jobs or had failed their training. Anyway, it was always interesting to listen to their exploits and knowledge of the outside world. We were all reaching the age now that our thoughts were turning towards the idea of what we were going to do after we left. One piece of advice given to us by the returnees was to volunteer for domestic or farm work. There were lectures being given to us now on how to behave outside, how to be respectful to our elders, how to speak only when spoken to, and how to be good workers. We even had lectures from our friendly, and my grandfather has a question mark there, our friendly vicar, on what we must expect in the outside world. We found it difficult to listen to this man, and believe what he was saying.